What if I told you that what keeps your life stagnant isn't what's happening, but from where you're looking at what happens? Maybe you've felt this in recent times, a silent repetition of patterns that always seem to bring you back to the same point, as if reality insists on echoing what you can no longer bear to feel. It's as if there were an invisible wall between you and the life you know, deep down, you could be living. But what if that wall weren't outside, but inside? What if the real prison weren't the facts, but the internal angle from which you observe them? Maybe no one ever told you this, but what you call reality might be nothing more than a reflection of the observer you've been until now. There is a part of you, subtle, silent, almost imperceptible, that interprets everything. And that part has the power to transform any experience, or to keep everything exactly as it is. Your gaze is not neutral. It vibrates, it organizes, it decides what remains and what disappears. Most people live trying to change what's on the outside, but they keep vibrating the same unconscious frequency within. They try to force new results with an old observer, and that's why, even with so much effort, so little truly changes. Because as long as the observer remains the same, life can only repeat what has already been. Do you feel this? Today, we're not going to talk about formulas, nor about ready-made techniques. We're going to enter a deeper territory, the silent origin of everything you experience. Because when you understand what observation really does, you have no choice but to transform it. Because it is there, exactly there, that your reality begins or ends. And that's exactly why now, in this moment, a new path may open, if you're willing to look from another place. The root of all problems is not in what happens to you, but in the way you interpret what happens. This sentence may seem simple at first glance, even common, but if you allow it to sink into a deeper place, you'll realize that within it lies a key capable of opening internal doors that have been locked for years. Because what you live is not what happens, it's what you mean about what happens. Everything you experience in the external world first passes through an invisible filter, your vibrational field. It is composed of the emotions you sustain, the beliefs you carry, the traumas you haven't yet embraced, and it is this field, silent but constant, that colors your lens of observation. Imagine for a moment that you wear glasses with colored lenses. If the lens is red, everything you see takes on that hue, even if the world isn't actually red. The problem is that most people have forgotten they're wearing lenses. They believe what they see is reality itself, but it's just a version, distorted and shaped by your inner state. This emotional lens is what legitimizes the repetition of patterns, because as long as you look at life with the same vibration, you recognize and reinforce the same types of situations. You keep attracting the same conflicts, the same feelings of inadequacy, the same cycles of lack or rejection. Not because the world is against you, but because your gaze is still attached to the frequency of what you've lived in the past. And here lies the root of almost all silent suffering, the confusion between fact and interpretation. You don't suffer because of what happened. You suffer because of how your field decoded what happened. A gaze conditioned by fear will see threat in everything. An observer vibrating abandonment will interpret absence as rejection, even when it's not. And this process is not rational. It's automatic, deeply unconscious. That's why changing reality isn't about changing the circumstances. It's about altering the origin of the observation. Because when the observer transforms, what is observed also changes. Not because the world changed, but because your field stopped feeding that version of the experience. And that's exactly where true freedom begins. Maybe you've already experienced this, even without realizing it. A day when you were light, centered, at peace, and even if something difficult happened, you dealt with it in a completely different way. You didn't react, you didn't blame yourself, you simply observed and moved on. The situation was the same, but the state of the observer had changed, and with that, the entire experience changed too. That's the point. It's not life that traps you, it's the way you observe it. It's not the past that limits you. It's the filter through which you still interpret it. It's not the other who blocks you. It's the internal lens that still projects old pain onto new faces. And while that filter isn't seen clearly, you'll remain stuck in a version of reality that no longer serves you, but still vibrates inside you. Notice, it's not about blaming yourself for this. The old observer was created to protect you. It was born from difficult moments, incomplete learnings, experiences that demanded you defend yourself. But now, maybe, it's keeping you from the life your heart is already ready to live. The good news is that the observer can be rewritten, and that rewriting doesn't happen through effort or struggle. It happens through presence. Through the simple act of noticing, this pain I'm feeling, does it really come from the now? Or is it the lens through which I'm seeing the now? That questioning by itself begins to dissolve the old field. It starts to release what was unconsciously being reinforced. The root of all problems is not the world. It's the internal state with which you interpret it. And that is in your hands. Because changing the observer doesn't require you to fix anything. It only requires that you remember who you are before the lens, before the pain, before the fear. That's where true transformation begins. The greatest illusion we were told, or maybe simply accepted without questioning, is that we see the world as it is. But the truth is much subtler and, at the same time, deeper. We don't see reality. We see our frequency projected onto it. What we call reality is, in fact, a vibrational overlay between what is out there and what is active in here. Have you ever stopped to wonder how two people can live the exact same situation and come away with completely different perceptions? One sees an opportunity, the other sees a threat. One feels gratitude, the other anger. One finds meaning, the other sinks into despair. The external fact is the same, but what changes is the internal field of the one observing. And this field, this silent vibration, collapses different versions of the same event. Quantum physics has already given us clues about this. There is no ready-made reality waiting for you. What exists is a field of infinite possibilities, and your state of observation is what determines which possibility manifests. The universe doesn't respond to your logic, it responds to your frequency. And frequency is determined, even unconsciously, by the emotional and vibrational state from which you observe. Think of a mirror. When you approach it with tension in your body and confusion in your eyes, that's exactly what it reflects. Not because it has an opinion about you, but because it simply reflects. Reality works the same way. It doesn't judge. It doesn't interpret. It just responds. And what it responds to is what you're emitting, even if you're unaware of it. The problem is that we grew up believing the world is happening to us, that we're victims of circumstances, people, luck, or misfortune. But when we look deeper, we realize there's a pattern, an internal rhythm that repeats. The same pains, the same challenges, the same frustrations, with different faces and forms, as if we were walking in circles. And maybe we are, because the observer hasn't changed. As long as you continue looking at life through the eyes of fear, it will keep showing you reasons to protect yourself. If your starting point is scarcity, you'll interpret abundance as a threat. If you carry a gaze marked by rejection, even the most neutral silence will feel like abandonment, and that has nothing to do with the facts themselves. It has to do with what still vibrates in you. Reality isn't trying to sabotage you. It's only mirroring the field with which you connect. And that requires a new kind of humility, because it's easier to blame the world. It's more comfortable to hold others, the system, the past accountable. What's truly hard is to sit in silence and ask, what part of me is collapsing this version of life? Not to punish yourself, but to set yourself free. This understanding breaks an old cycle, because if it's the observer who creates the experience, then the power has always been yours. And it's not about thinking positively or pretending gratitude. It's about clearly noticing where your gaze is coming from, what emotion it sustains, what story it's still repeating, what pain it's still protecting, and most of all, what choice it's still avoiding. There's a difference between looking and seeing. Looking is physical, seeing is vibrational. And seeing with awareness is the first step to changing anything. From the moment you realize you're not seeing life, but rather your frequency reflected in it, you hold the key that can open doors that once seemed locked by fate, because fate also responds to the observer. This is one of the great shifts in consciousness. Knowing that what you interpret as reality might just be the reflection of a part of you that is already ready to be released. And when that part is embraced, recognized, and let go, the mirror changes. The vibration changes, and with it, everything that once seemed unmovable begins to dissolve. Life isn't showing you what it is. It's showing you who you are being when you look at it. This is the breaking point of the illusion. Because when you realize this, you stop trying to change the scene and start changing the lens. And when the lens changes, everything changes. Even if, on the outside, everything looks the same, on the inside, a new reality has already begun to form. There is a moment, sometimes silent, when everything inside us begins to tremble. Not because the world changed, but because suddenly something shifts in our internal field. It's as if a voice that had always been muffled whispers, "It was never the world against you. It was you, trapped in a part of yourself that no longer serves you." And this revelation, though simple, is profoundly transformative, because it dissolves the victim role. It returns the power. It shows us that the cycle of pain was not being fed from the outside, but by the vibration we were unconsciously sustaining within. This is the awakening point. The moment when you understand that you no longer need to fight against life. Because there is no struggle when there is understanding. And to understand means to see what was previously in the dark. When you realize that you were interpreting everything from an unconscious field of fear, scarcity, or rejection, the pain begins to dissolve. Because what sustained the prison was not the event. It was the meaning you attached to it. And that meaning came from the old observer. Maybe you felt this. An instant when everything became clear, even without a logical explanation. A relief that didn't come from the outside, but from within, as if for the first time you were breathing fully. This state is not a fantasy. It is the reflection of a vibrational shift, a release from the frequency that sustained the old cycles. It's as if you had finally stepped out of the role of the one who suffers, into the place of the one who sees, and in seeing, chooses differently. And don't be mistaken. This awakening doesn't mean everything around you transforms overnight, but it means that, inside you, the pattern that fed the old begins to lose its strength. The world may still try to repeat the old dance, but you no longer vibrate to the same tune. And that is irreversible, because when the observer changes, the mirror also begins to change. Not out of obligation, but out of vibrational coherence. And it is at this point in the journey that something very special happens. You begin to feel free even without external guarantees. Because true freedom is not doing what you want, nor having everything resolved. Freedom is being able to observe any scenario and still remain centered, conscious, and whole. It is being able to see without getting lost, to feel without drowning, to choose without resistance. And that state is born precisely from the moment you realize, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to observe now. The old pain, the repeated patterns, the silent battles, all of it began to dissolve the moment you looked at yourself from another place. And maybe this video, this experience, is that point for you. The moment when something inside begins to let go. And if it is, allow yourself to honor that moment. Don't ignore it. Don't treat it as just another pretty reflection. This insight is a seed of a new reality, a new vibration about to take form. If this resonated with you, like this video now. And most importantly, write in the comments, I choose to be the new observer. Write it with presence, with intention, with truth. Because this simple act is not just an interaction, it is a vibrational declaration, a subtle commitment to the new. A symbolic reminder that from this point on, you no longer walk on autopilot. You walk with awareness. And that is the greatest choice anyone can make, to exit repetition and enter the flow. You are not trapped by what was done to you. You are only repeating without realizing. the angle from which you learned to see yourself. But now a new vision has opened, and it begins exactly where you are, here, observing, choosing, rewriting. Once the observer awakens, the question naturally arises, now what? How do you live life from this new place? How do you sustain a different reality without falling again into the old automatisms that once felt so real? The answer is subtle but definitive. Life changes from the inside out, and the most powerful tool for that shift is not willpower or rigid discipline. It is awareness of where, within you, the gaze begins. Every time something unsettles you, every time a situation feels too challenging or too familiar in its pain, try to stop. Be silent for a moment and ask yourself honestly, from where within me am I looking at this? This question is not seeking a logical answer. It serves to realign your field, to bring light to the point of origin of your state. Because what determines what you experience is not the event, it is the vibrational field with which you interpret it. When you ask that question, you begin to notice something fundamental. Most of your reactions come from a conditioned place, old places, emotional programming that activates automatically, fear of loss, urgency to fix, desire for control, anxiety for acceptance. These vibrational states are like filters installed in the unconscious, and as long as you are looking at life through them, it will continue reflecting exactly those frequencies. But when you identify the filter, something breaks. You start to see that the problem was never exactly what happened, but the energy placed on what happened. You begin to recognize that there was a part of you still reacting based on what was wounded, not based on what is present. And that changes everything, because with that clarity, you can choose again. And true choice doesn't come from thought. It comes from the field. Changing the lens through which you observe life is an energetic process. You don't need to convince yourself that you're at peace. You need to enter the state of peace. And that begins with the body, with the breath, with attention. A slow gesture, a pause in the middle of chaos, a moment of presence can shift your entire field's vibration. And when the field changes, reality begins to respond differently. Maybe at first you only notice a subtle lightness, a relief without explanation, a sense that what once overwhelmed you no longer has the same weight, as if the emotion were still there, but without the same control over you. That is the silent proof that something real has begun to move. Because when the observer changes, the reaction loses strength. And in place of reaction, a conscious response emerges. You begin to realize that you no longer need to justify yourself or prove anything. You don't need to rush or defend yourself. Life is no longer testing you. It is simply responding to your new vibration. And that internal state starts to feel familiar. You recognize it as home. An inner home made of presence, silence, and choice. But it's important to remember, changing the observer is not a one-time event. It is a commitment to inner truth, a continuous process of listening. Every time you catch yourself reacting, you have a new opportunity to ask, who is looking now? Am I seeing from fear or from presence? Am I trying to control or allowing flow? Am I repeating or rewriting? This inner dialogue is what begins to dissolve the old, not with guilt, not with effort, but with gentle observation. Real change doesn't shout, it whispers, and that whisper becomes louder than any external noise when you begin to trust it. When you realize that the external reality is just an update of your internal field, life then stops being something that happens to you and becomes something that happens through you. And in that place where the observer is new, everything can bloom. Because now, finally, you are no longer trapped in the old lens. You are choosing from where to look. And that place from which you choose to look is the fertile soil where your new reality begins to grow. When the observer changes, something much greater begins to reorganize. It's not just an internal feeling of relief or clarity. It's as if the universe silently begins to recalibrate the responses it gives you. Everything that once felt stuck begins to yield. What once required effort begins to move naturally. And the most curious part is that, on the outside, little has changed. But within you, the frequency sustaining your reality is no longer the same. And this has a quantum impact. The field we live in is intelligent. It doesn't analyze your desires or judge whether you deserve them or not. It simply responds. It resonates. It reorganizes based on what you emit, not what you think, but what you vibrate. That's why, when the observer accesses a new vibrational state, they collapse different realities. What once seemed impossible begins to become accessible, not because you achieved it, but because you aligned with it. And that alignment happens when your inner field no longer sustains the old version of life. This is quantum unfolding. When you stop carrying old pain in your gaze, you stop encountering the same type of response from the universe. The outer world is merely the reflection of a field in motion. And when that field changes, synchronicities begin to appear. Connections become more subtle. Answers come effortlessly. The flow, which once seemed like a concept, begins to be a direct experience. But this change doesn't happen in the mind. It happens at deeper levels. It's when you stop vibrating in the frequency of control, scarcity, urgency, and begin to sustain subtler states like surrender, presence, trust. These states are not passive, quite the opposite. They open doors that effort cannot, because effort vibrates resistance. Presence, on the other hand, vibrates coherence, and the field responds to coherence with flow. At this stage of the journey, it's common for people to report unexpected transformations. Not because they forced external changes, but because something inside reconfigured. Doors open, connections are re-established. Opportunities arise as if they had been waiting for that small vibrational shift. And they were, because the field already contained all possibilities. What was missing was for the observer to become compatible with what they claimed to desire. This is a truth many still resist accepting. You don't attract what you want. You attract what is compatible with your field. And being compatible doesn't mean thinking positively. It means sustaining a real, felt vibration, aligned with what you want to live. It means observing with trust, even when facts still don't show the change. It means sustaining the frequency of the new, even when old signals still appear. And this requires attention, not effort, but presence. Because the field doesn't respond to words, it responds to internal states. It's your feeling that shapes what collapses. That's why the most powerful practice is not doing more, it's observing more deeply, feeling more authentically, quieting enough to hear what your field is emitting before you even speak. The universe is listening to that. When the observer enters this new place, they understand they no longer need to fight with reality, because now they know they are co-creating with it. They know that by sustaining a vibration of clarity, truth, and openness, the surrounding field inevitably begins to reflect that, not as magic, but as vibrational correspondence. The invisible begins to organize the visible. This is the point where reality begins to respond in a new way, not because you begged for it, but because you became compatible with it. The people who arrive, the paths that are revealed, the answers that appear, all of this begins to flow not out of luck, but alignment. Because the universe doesn't deny possibilities, it only waits for the vibration that sustains them. And it's here that many realize that what seemed difficult was never an external block. It was just the reflection of a misaligned internal state. When the state changes, the reflection changes. The old struggle gives way to the dance. Fear dissolves in presence, and anxiety makes room for the now. This is quantum unfolding, an echo of the new observer reverberating in the field of life. And once it begins, it cannot be undone, because what was seen with truth can no longer be ignored. Even after a genuine vibrational shift, there is a subtle phenomenon that often confuses those on this path of transformation: the final echoes of the old field. Like echoes of a song that has already been turned off, these manifestations do not indicate that you've gone backward. They merely show that reality is still reorganizing its correspondence with your new internal state. And it's exactly at this moment that many give up, believing that the change didn't work, that the effort was in vain, that the old still holds power. But the truth is different. The field doesn't go backward. What changed within has already begun to dissolve what is no longer compatible. It's just that the visible world, This mirror, with a slight delay, still returns images of the previous observer, as if gently asking you, are you really firm in this new place? Or are you going to return to identifying with the old? This is the most delicate point of the journey, because the new is still silent and the old still screams. The old field tries to reassert itself with situations that test you, not out of cruelty, but because it still echoes in parts of you that have not been fully integrated. And if you are not attentive, you might mistake these tests for failure. You might think that nothing has changed, but it has. It has changed at the most important level, the place from which you observe. That's why one of the deepest and most transformative practices comes into play: the anchor question. Who is observing now? It seems simple, but it holds immense power, because this question is not meant to be answered with words. It's a portal, an invitation to presence, a reminder that you are not what you feel, nor what you think, nor what you experience. You are the one who is watching. And from the moment you get used to asking this question sincerely, something begins to stabilize within you. Old emotions may still arise, but they no longer have the same control. Old thoughts may still appear, but you no longer cling to them as absolute truths. The observer you are becoming is already capable of seeing all of this, and in seeing, freeing. This is the stage of vibrational consolidation. The moment when the new state begins to establish itself as natural, you no longer need to remember all the time. It begins to happen by default, and the default is proof that the field has stabilized. This doesn't mean you'll never again feel fear, doubt, or sadness. It simply means those sensations will no longer have the power to control your gaze. You begin to live from another place, a place that sees fear but chooses trust. That feels discomfort but doesn't fall apart because of it. That observes the final echoes of the old field without identifying with them, and this internal stability creates a new kind of strength, the strength of non-reaction, the strength of clarity, the strength of truth. And perhaps the most beautiful part of all this is realizing that you don't need to fight the old to establish yourself in the new. You only need to keep choosing, moment by moment, from where you want to observe life. Each time you make that choice, you weaken the old and reinforce the new. You stop feeding the old pattern and begin to nourish the reality you want to sustain. It's like crossing a bridge between worlds. On one side, what you knew, even if it hurt you, it was familiar. On the other, a new frequency, still without defined forms, but real in its vibration. And in the middle, you, the observer who is rebuilding. Crossing that bridge requires trust, but a trust that doesn't come from logic. It comes from the body, from the soul, from a deep memory that knows it is possible to live differently. That question, who is observing now, is not just a practice, it is a path back to yourself. It's what keeps you awake when everything seems to want to pull you back to the old. It's what realigns your field when you get lost in automatic reactions. It's what, repeated with presence, transforms instability into rootedness. Over time, you realize you don't even need to ask it so often anymore, because the new observer is already there. It has become you, not as an idea, but as a stable vibrational state. And when that happens, the old simply dissolves, not from effort, but from disuse. Because what is no longer sustained within finds no mirror outside. Life doesn't change when things change. It changes when the place from which you observe them changes. Everything you experience is a vibrational response to the observer who inhabits your silence. When that observer awakens, the world no longer has the same power over you, because now it's you who sustains the field, and reality simply reflects. You don't need to force anything. You only need to remain aware of who is watching, because the universe does not respond to your appearance, nor to your desires. It responds to your frequency. And if you felt this journey up to this point, if something within you silenced or expanded, write in the comments, I am the one who chooses to observe with awareness. That way, I'll know you made it to the end, and that you're ready to live reality from your awakened center.